The story goes that it happened on a cold morning in the winter of 1944, somewhere in occupied France, on a muddy road behind the front lines. A black American lieutenant was walking toward a checkpoint. Two white officers stood in his path, and as he approached, they did something the United States Army strictly forbade. They refused to return his salute. They looked at his bars, they looked at his face, and they decided his rank did not apply to them. What they did not know was that a staff car had stopped a short distance away, and a man in a polished helmet was watching the whole thing. This is the story of what happened when two officers demanded that the rules of rank bend around them and got the attention of General George S. Patton instead. It is one of the most repeated Patton stories on the internet, and before we go any further, I want to be honest with you about exactly how much of it is true. Stay with me, because the real ending is better than the legend. First, let me tell you the legend, the way it has been retold 1,000 times, because you have probably heard a version of it. As the story is told, Patton stepped out of his car. He was not a man who raised his voice when a man, cold one, would do. He walked up to the two officers who had just refused to salute a fellow American in uniform, and he asked them a simple question. Did they understand what that salute was for? Not for the man, he is supposed to have said, for the rank, for the country behind the rank. When you refuse to salute the uniform, the story has him saying, "You are not insulting one lieutenant. You are spitting on the Army of the United States." And then, as the legend goes, Patton ended it. He did not debate. He did not lecture. He ordered the two officers stripped of their authority on the spot and saw to it that their careers never recovered. The lieutenant they had humiliated returned the general's nod and walked on. That is the story. That is the version that gets shared, narrated, and passed around, and it is a powerful one because it tells you something you want to believe about a famous man. Now, let me tell you what the records actually show, because this is where it gets interesting and where the truth turns out to matter more than the myth. That specific scene, the two officers on the road, the exact words, the careers, ended in a single morning, cannot be found in any verified wartime document. It is what historians politely call apocryphal, a story that grew in the retelling, that may have started from something real and hardened into a scene that never quite happened the way it is told. If a narrator hands you that scene as confirmed fact, with the dialogue word for word, they are selling you a legend dressed as history. But here is the thing. The reason this legend stuck to Patton and not to some other general is that it points at something genuinely true about the man and about the army he led. And the genuine truth is a far more important story than the invented one. So let us go to what really happened. In the autumn of 1944, the United States Army was a segregated army. This is the hard ground the whole story stands on. Black and white soldiers served in separate units. The prevailing assumption among much of the military leadership going into the war was that black soldiers were not fit for frontline combat, that they belonged in supply units, in labor battalions, behind the wheel and behind the lines, but not in the tanks and not in the fight. That was the official thinking. That was the wall. The 4th of November, 1944, France. A unit called the 761st Tank Battalion rolled toward the front. They were a black tank battalion, their crews trained and ready. And they had been waiting a long time for this moment. They called themselves the Black Panthers. And the general who had asked for them, who wanted them in his Third Army, when many others did not want them at all, was George S. Patton. Patton was a complicated man, and an honest telling does not pretend otherwise. He was a product of his time, and his private views on race were not the views we would want a hero to hold. He said things and wrote things that do not sit easily today. So, this is not the story of a man free of the prejudice of his era. It is something more interesting than that. It is the story of what he did when the fighting actually started. Because when the 761st arrived, Patton did not address them with soft words about equality. He climbed up where his new tank crews could see him, and he told them, in his own blunt way, that he did not care what color they were. He told them he had requested the best, and that he expected them to be the best, and that the whole army would be watching to see what they did. He framed it the only way Patton ever framed anything, not as charity, as a challenge. Go out there and prove it. And here is the part the legend is really reaching for, the truth underneath the invented scene on the road. They proved it. The men of the 761st fought for 183 days, almost without relief. They fought in the brutal cold of the Battle of the Bulge. They smashed through German fortifications. They fought across 6 countries, attached to multiple divisions, going wherever the line was hardest. By the war's end, the Black Panthers had inflicted enormous losses on the enemy. Hundreds of their men earned decorations for heroism. One of them, Sergeant Reuben Rivers, earned the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest award for valor, for a stand that cost him his life. It would take more than 50 years for that medal to finally be placed in his family's hands. And on the day the war in Europe ended, when the tanks of the 761st lined up along a river in Austria, General George S. Patton stood up in his jeep, straight and tall, in front of the black soldiers he had once dared to prove themselves, and those soldiers saluted him smartly, by the book. The salute that the legend imagined being forced at gunpoint on a muddy road was, in the real story, given freely, earned on both sides, by men who had nothing left to prove to anyone. That is the truth the myth was clumsily trying to tell you. So, why does the invented salute story even exist? Why do people keep attaching it to Patton? Specifically, because of who Patton actually was on the one subject the legend gets right, discipline, the salute. Patton was, by every account, an absolute fanatic about military discipline, and the salute sat at the very center of it. He believed, with total conviction, that the small disciplines made the large ones, that a man who would not salute properly, who would not shave, who would not keep his uniform correct, was a man who would also break under fire. He drilled it into the Third Army until they hated him for it, and then they followed him further than any other army in Europe. To Patton, the salute was never about one man bowing to another. It was about the chain, the idea that every soldier, top to bottom, was bound to the same code, and that the code did not bend for anyone's pride or anyone's grudge. An officer who refused a lawful salute was, in Patton's world, a man attacking the very thing that held an army together. That part of the back legend, the idea that Patton would come down like a hammer on an officer who treated the salute as optional, is not invented at all. It is the most accurate thing in the whole story. And there is a second, quieter reason the legend endures, and it is the one worth sitting with. People want it to be true. They want there to have been a moment in a segregated army, in a prejudiced age, when a powerful white general stopped on a road and told 2 men to their faces that the uniform outranked their bigotry. The legend exists because it is the moral, the real. History actually delivers, just compressed into a single dramatic scene that is easier to share than the truth of 183 days of combat and 50 years of waiting for a medal. The invented version gives you a clean, instant justice. The real version gives you something harder and better. It gives you black soldiers who were told they were not good enough, handed their chance by a flawed man for his own hard reasons, and who answered not with a single dramatic moment, but with months of blood and courage that made the answer undeniable. The legend ends a career on a road. The truth earns a Medal of Honor on a battlefield. One of those is a story. The other one happened. So when you see that title, the one that promises you two officers who demanded a salute and lost everything for it, now you know the whole shape of it. You know the scene itself is almost certainly a myth. You know the discipline behind it was absolutely real. And you know that the deeper truth the myth is grasping at, the truth about the Black Panthers and the salute that was finally earned and freely given, is a story that needs no exaggeration at all. Here is what I want to ask you, and I genuinely want your answer in the comments. When a legend like this one is built on top of a true and powerful history, does the legend do more harm by being false, or more good by carrying the real lesson to people who would never have heard it otherwise? Does the myth honor the Black Panthers, or does it quietly steal their thunder? I have my own view, but I would rather hear yours, so tell me below and let us argue it out. And if this video set the record straight for you, if you would rather have the true story than the comfortable one, do me a favor and hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that people actually want history done honestly, and that is the only way channels like this one survive. Because the next story I want to tell you is about Sergeant Reuben Rivers himself, the Black Panther, who won the Medal of Honor and waited more than 50 years for his country to admit it. What he did in those final hours, refusing to leave his men when he had every reason and every order to go, is one of the most extraordinary acts of courage in the entire war, and almost nobody knows his name. Subscribe so you do not miss it, because once you hear what Reuben Rivers did, you will never forget him. Thanks for watching.